Welcome, everyone, to our Apollo webinar event with Amy Wilson. Today, we'll be exploring a bunch of things, this particularly around startup marketing strategies, right? How they're built, successfully implemented, how they impact your startup success, and why they're so important. Before we get into it, I just wanted to share some exciting news today. So today's event is actually sponsored by Revolut, obviously a well-known leader in the financial services sector. And they're offering an exclusive deal. So you can receive up to £200 in cash by signing up with a business account within the next 30 days. So I'll be sharing a special link at the end of this event via Apollo. And later this evening, you'll be able to claim your offer through that link. But yeah, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Amy Wilson. She's an accomplished marketing expert and the agency founder. Her passions lie with obviously nurturing young, dynamic organizations during their early stages, helping them shape their marketing ethos and future trajectory of their startup. She's got a really deep understanding of the whole startup landscape, and her ability to connect with founders and entrepreneurs really makes her an invaluable asset to any stage venture, really. And we're lucky to have you in our community. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you, Amy. That's really kind of you to say.
Of course. Just a little bit of housekeeping here, guys. We obviously want you to get the most out of this event, right? So we'll be giving you the opportunity to ask Amy your own questions, which we'll then address probably in the second half of this event. So go ahead and throw your questions in the chat, and we'll try to cover as many as possible. If we can't get through all of them, feel free to just reach out to Amy on Apollo, and I'm sure you guys can set up some time from there. But yeah, without further ado, Amy, let's get into kind of how we would craft an ideal marketing team, right, for your startup. It's obviously an important area to cover and kind of daunting to some people in terms of the lack of knowledge and how to go about it. So what kind of key factors do you consider, when assessing an initial marketing strategy for a startup?
Well, I think the most important thing is to spend some time with the people in the team and work out some initial important questions. So, who are the team already in place in the startup? What skills do they have? And obviously, what kind of budget and resource does that startup have? We've all heard the kind of classic, everybody has Hollywood expectation and, A-level media studies budget. So that's one of the most important considerations that I think about when I'm talking about how to plan marketing with founders and how to manage their expectations. And, coming back to the team, do you have a team of 25 and they've all got 5 years experience and they can hit the ground running with different media channels, or is it one junior executive or an intern? And those sorts of things will be the key considerations for me when I'm looking at cascading out new marketing initiatives.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you need to address your own capabilities, right, and assess your position right now in terms of your venture and what makes sense for you. But once you have that understanding, what are the kind of some of the key roles or skills that you need to prioritize in finding that right mix of specialized skill sets and obviously the adaptability that you need to have with anyone in your team at this early stage?
Yeah, obviously that's quite a tough general question to answer because it really depends.
Yeah, straight out the gate. I mean, we're not giving you any warm up here.
And what the company is trying to achieve. But generally speaking, there are some media channels that work better than others, that are higher intent than others, and generally I would try and max those out before I look at other things. So for example, I personally wouldn't book a tube campaign until I'd maxed out paid search. I've maxed out the people who are already looking for your product or service. But I think the other thing to consider, which I see an awful lot, is companies going straight to thinking about how they're going to execute their media or how they're going to share their message, and they haven't actually thought about the message itself. I even see this on pitch decks. I get to the end of a 25-page pitch deck and I still don't really understand what the company does. So one of the things I've seen a lot is good money being spent after bad, because in some scenarios founders are really happy to spend £500,000 on paid advertising, but they haven't actually paid $5,000 or $10,000 to experts to help them really articulate what it is their business is trying to do and what their unique service offering is.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of obviously We were talking about previously, kind of three different ways, right? Three different channels. So in terms of obviously once you've assessed the skill sets that you might need in the team, how do you determine that ideal mix, right? Between like in-house talent or freelancers or supplier partnerships when you're forming that marketing team?
Yeah, so I think I would answer this by saying I'm really lucky in that I've worked across a huge variety of team structures,
Hmm.
right from back of an envelope startup where there's just the founding team through to multi-billion pound global organizations where I've had teams of up to 400. So I think what I've started to learn while working with startups over the last 15 years is that there is often a place for experts in their field that work on a freelance basis during the high growth stage. The reason for that is you can bring in a team of freelancers who might not need to work on a full-time basis. So from a
Mm.
financial point of view, you could potentially bring in a SEO 1 day a week, a PPC person 2 days a week, and you could end up with a blended cost that is actually less than bringing in a mid-tier permanent junior marketer. And that can be really, really effective. The other reason I like having the flexibility of freelancers is because you might be launching a media channel from the get-go and you might not actually know if that media channel works for you. So, take a scenario where you're deciding to launch paid search and you've put some budget aside to test how that works. If
Hmm.
you've hired a permanent paid search employee and they're brought in to full-time manage paid search, but you get 3 months down the line and find out that your customer acquisition costs aren't sustainable, then you're in the unfortunate position where you're going to have to do a redundancy process or let someone go. Whereas if you bring in an agency that perhaps specializes in a couple of different channels like Meta, like Google, like TikTok ads, you have that flexibility to try different channels with the resources that you have. And it's also, usually easier to enter sort of a trial period with a freelancer or an agency. So for
Mm.
me, that tends to be a really important part of the mix. I also know that some founders are uncomfortable bringing in permanent employees when they've only got fundraising to run the company for 6 months. So there's lots of different reasons why it helps to have a combination of agencies, freelancers, and employees. There are some things that I personally think sit better in-house. So things like running content on social media, answering customer service questions, running the email marketing. Generally, I would gravitate towards a permanent employee for that reason, because it takes a lot of time for them to build up the skills and knowledge that are specific to your brand.
Mm.
The other time it's good to bring in perms is if you've had, say, an expert agency or an expert freelancer who's slightly more expensive and they've embedded a new media channel well. That can sometimes be a good time after 3 or 4 months to hand over to a permanent employee for more of a business as usual type situation. But for me, I will come in and I will assess what's going on in the business, what the resources are available, and I will try to kind of recommend a mix of the best combination of employees, freelancers, and agencies.
Right. Okay. So it really comes down to then again what we touched on first in terms of really assessing your needs and making sure that that matches to basically what you're trying to achieve, right, with your marketing. So keeping it either really dynamic and not committing to anyone too much if you're not sure about the path forward, or getting someone really solid in there from the beginning and then working with them throughout the whole process. So now that makes a lot of sense. So now you've assessed your needs, you've got the team together, the right mix of people. So let's touch on then developing kind of that go-to-market strategy with this, right? So how do you first of all effectively kind of position your idea or your venture in a very competitive market?
So this kind of ties back to the point I said about spending good money after bad. You really
Hmm.
need to know what you're saying to people. And I think one of the things I come across a lot is this expectation that someone's going to read a 10-page document or watch a 5 minute long YouTube video. And usually the time that you've got to get someone's attention is very, very short. It's, seconds, it's scrolling, it's a chat with someone at an event, and you've got 2 sentences, 3 sentences to quickly articulate something to get more of their time and attention invested in your business. So for me, it's always making sure that you've got a really clear value proposition and that you're testing, 1 or 2 or 3 messages. Say, for example, you did decide to launch paid search or Meta, you want to make sure that you're testing a couple of different calls to action. So that's really important. And a really nice way to do that is to do a landscape analysis. that's something that usually sits in the remit of brands. So if you're lucky, you're going to have a really competent set of creatives working with you on that. If you don't have quite as much budget, it might be that you've got a freelancer or you've got, you know, an intern or something. But what I like to do is look at your competitive landscape, pick your competitors, and even a simple exercise like lining up all their websites side by side, you can quickly start to see if there's a common theme, a language, colorways that are used in that industry, and you can decide, oh, I'm going to be like those, I'm going to show that I belong there. Or you can decide, I'm going to disrupt this, I want to differentiate, you know, insurance is blue, so I want to be hot pink, you know. So there's lots of different strategies you can use, but I definitely recommend that as a first step you look at what's out there, and especially when you line them all up, you start to see that everybody tends to be barking from the same tree, and you can easily find new ways to bring, you know, like messaging to that sector.
Right. No, of course, that makes a lot of sense. Something I always kind of touch on with any early stage founders is you know, really understanding that competition is should be encouraging. You know, it's proving that there's a demand out there, and so understanding that you need to do that landscape analysis and then obviously highlight your USPs and really believe in it and go from there makes a lot of sense. So Amy, do you have any kind of a particular example you might have had in terms of creating an effective go-to-market strategy that you've been involved in, and what made it exactly, you know, successful in your eyes?
Well, I worked on a really successful piece of branding that I'm very proud of. That's award winning, and that was for InsurTech during COVID. They were doing some things to try to disrupt the car insurance market, and we did do that exact process that I'm describing, a landscape analysis. And we found, this was about 4 years ago, we found that the landscape was kind of quite polarized. We had the sort of traditional blue, you know, fintech branding, but then at that time there were some other brands that were going sort of really horrible colorways like oranges and greens with illustration and stuff. So there was like two clear routes that most of the competitors were using, and we decided, because part of the brief was to target young drivers, the millennial audience, we decided to go with, you know, like really neon colors and like really thick fonts, really retro imagery, kind of like Super Mario type imagery. And when we went and showed it against all the competitors, it was really different. There was also an element of having an app and gamification, so it all tied in really, really nicely with that. And part of that exercise as well was that we were looking at the personas that we wanted to target. Part of the proposition we created for investors is that we wanted to target cohorts that were traditionally assumed to be high risk drivers. So for example, young drivers, people who did a lot of driving for their businesses, so they had high mileage, which with typical underwriting would normally give them a higher premium. But because of the technology we were deploying, we were saying that we could underwrite them in a different way. So we were then overlaying imagery of what we assumed those cohorts looked like into our ads. So it made those ads particularly relevant when they were being served back to those types of people on social media. So that was one I was really, really proud of, and it won a Monotype award for the fonts that we deployed in there. So yeah, that's one I would use as my case study.
Amazing. No, that's a great success story, you know, one of many I'm sure that you have under your belt at this point. But yeah, that's really interesting about, you know, obviously also tailoring it to your audience, right? Finding that niche and then being able to stay, you know, dynamic and adaptable in terms of once you start expanding and offering, you know, to a bigger market, then you can tailor those campaigns to that specific audience, right? And understanding them, and, you know, understanding their professions, their lifestyles, and you know, what's going to attract them or what's going to get their attention in the most effective way. So it kind of brings us along to then, once you've maybe hopefully successfully raised some capital, right, and you've got some investment, in your experience, you know, how approachable, or how do you approach the transformation of that marketing strategy from, you know, initial to post investment, once, you know, considering all the new resources and capital and possible business objectives that you have at that point?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to acknowledge is that once you've received investment, you have two marketing objectives, right? One is to grow your business in the way that you've promised to investors, but the other is also potentially keep raising investment and making your investors aware that you are achieving what you've promised. So your stakeholders are essentially your end customers and then your investors. So sometimes I've been involved with companies where they haven't actually realised that there's still a comms piece around the investor base. So that's one to acknowledge. And I think if you are still fundraising, you need to be a lot more active, continually keeping up a dialogue with those investors. And I've seen some really sneaky things done over the years. I'm not going to say I'm responsible for these, but if you have a hypothesis about where your investors are, you can use geo-targeting to make sure that they get a higher frequency of adverts. I've even seen someone book media on a bus route that went past an investor's head office, and you can specifically buy media on specific bus routes. So that's something I have seen done. So just, on top of doing that business as usual marketing to reach your end client, there is also this piece around making the investors think that you're really hot investment and that you're all over the place. But actually I've seen some quite sneaky tactics deployed to make that maybe seem the case when maybe it's not happening on a national or global level. I'm not advocating these tactics necessarily, but that they are available and they are there in the toolkit if you are fundraising.
Of course. And you mentioned, the expectation that comes with investment, right? And needing to be careful about kind of setting those expectations to make sure that they kind of still align with your company vision and that the investor doesn't totally take over your direction, right? So how do you ensure that marketing strategy still aligns with both obviously the investor's goals, but then ensuring that you still keep that, your overarching vision of your venture?
Look, working with investors is never straightforward. It's not straightforward while you're fundraising. It's not straightforward once you've got their money in the bank. And it's certainly not straightforward if market conditions change or something goes wrong in the business. So, I mean, the best thing I would say is to have an open door with your investors and have a really, high integrity, have an open dialogue with them. I think, when you're fundraising, you get all different types of investment relationships. You can get grilled on the tiniest details, or you can have investors that are a little bit more laid back and more about the bigger picture. I think what I've seen quite a few times when I've helped companies with fundraising is some investors, potentially those who are a little bit older, can be a bit scared of digital technology, digital marketing. And I've definitely been in scenarios where I've had to go into quite a lot of detail to explain how things like meta ads work. I think it can be really daunting to investors when they see, 500 grand, 3 million assigned to a marketing channel that they don't understand. And I think, there's been various sales tactics I've seen over the years to try and maybe make people scared to make decisions about using technology. And I've always been quite opposed to that. And I think there's a really diplomatic way that you can always explain technologies and medias in a way that doesn't make anyone feel embarrassed. And as long as you can set that tone in a meeting that, it is a safe space, there aren't any stupid questions, you're going to set off on a really good foot with investors that perhaps do have doubts about the use of those technologies or the use of those medias.
Right. So it's obviously dependent on the investor, right, and their engagement.
Absolutely.
With it as well.
If you've got an investor from a tech background, then it's not going to be an issue. But I think it's about making sure that everyone's comfortable and there's not assumed levels of knowledge about things that maybe aren't in the regular lane of people from their previous experience.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, perfect. Well, okay, so we're understanding now that dynamic of how the marketing kind of strategy of your company may need to evolve post-investment, right? But in terms of the actual team that you have and in managing that, right, as an entrepreneur, you've got a lot of people to focus on and a lot of priorities on the plate. So in terms of fostering that kind of culture of innovation, right, within the team and maintaining the focus, obviously, on your strategic goals, how do you go about doing that and making sure that the team stays engaged, stays innovative and excited and fosters that creativity?
Well, I approach leadership and I approach management a bit like the saying you hear about parenting, right? No one wants to repeat the mistakes their parents subjected them to. So I think back to all the terrible managers that I've had over my long career, and I just try not to do the things that I hated being subjected to. And, for me, I want to create, I've been around the block a lot now, so I'm quite fortunate that I've got a strong sense of my leadership style and I'm confident in my leadership style. So for me, it's about creating a culture of trust and psychological safety, because I just don't believe it's possible to foster innovation if people are scared to put up their hand and scared about saying the wrong thing. So for me, I like to try and trust people unless they give me a reason not to trust them. And I don't do it the other way around. It's not that they have to build trust, with
Hmm.
me. I've hired them. Let's get on with it. But I do, I set a high expectation and I hope that people respond well to that. I think, there's a question mark about respect. I don't think leaders should demand respect. They have to earn it. So they have to create a respectful, trustful working environment. So I'm really, really strong on that. And I think that people need to be not afraid of failing, not afraid to come and speak to their managers. There are sort of processes you can put in place. So, during COVID, I was a really big fan of having sort of 15-minute sprints with the whole team every morning, because it helped things move forward quickly and there weren't barriers with people needing to have things delivered or things that they need to ask of other team members. But one of the things I really enjoy doing is having a regular personal development checkpoints with anyone who does report into me. And I had a good example of when I hired a grad a few years ago, and we were doing regular PDPs every month. And one of her PDPs, we were just sort of finishing writing out her objectives for the month. And she's, quiet as a mouse. She says, Amy, there's something I just wanted to ask you. And I was like, yeah, okay. She was like, oh, sometimes, I can't do what I need to do because you forget to reply to my emails, or you forget to send me the document that I need. And she was, so scared to ask me this. And I felt terrible. And I actually put in her personal development plan, nag Amy regularly. And I wanted to make her feel as comfortable as possible so that she had everything she needed to do her job. So for me, that's just an example of how I really try to bring that self-awareness to the job and make sure that my team are really comfortable and that we can innovate and we can progress.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Everyone's different, right? So you have to make sure, first of all, that you're fostering a community of people that you like to work with. That's always something that we really highlight in terms of the partnerships that we put in place. Really, it comes down to that you're going to be working with these people for hopefully an extended period of time, right? And nothing will progress or progress will be slow if you can't get along, right? So that's kind of the basis of everything.
But absolutely, but also, that taps into retention and churn. And actually, in a startup, when things are moving quickly and you've got very tight, gateways to get to meet deadlines for your investors and, maybe release more funding, the last thing you want is staff leaving every 3 months because they're not on board and they're not being respected and they're not happy. So there definitely is a commercial implication, especially when you think, recruiters' fees. If you're working with recruiters, you're paying 20 to 25% of salary to get them on board, or, a markup on freelancer day rates. So, I lead by that way because I believe in it strongly, but it does definitely have a huge commercial undertone. And it's something that if I've been sent into businesses where there's been a lot of churn and people leaving, refusing to work their notice, and it does affect deliverables. So there's the other way of looking at it as well.
Yeah, no, of course. And there's obviously something that our founders can struggle with often is basically when to engage with, or when to really prioritize marketing, right? Is it at the really early stage where you're still kind of validating the idea and building the traction? Is it, when you're about to go to market, or you've just secured investment, or even post that? So kind of how do you assess, or maybe you can provide an example of someone that was maybe prioritizing marketing at the wrong time, or too late, or too soon, or something like that? And how do you support the people that you work with in terms of making sure it's the right time to prioritize marketing?
I think 99 times out of 100, startups can't do as much marketing as they want because of budget, and they can't do things as early as they want because the budget doesn't allow for it. So I think given that boundary that's very real for businesses, I would say that the ways you can prioritize are making sure you do things in the right order. So I'm always, if you're one of those startups that's done your branding on the back of the napkin, pending investment, I always say do the branding, do the proper brand work, the identity, the brand pillars, the value proposition as early as you can, because that will make things so much easier for you when you've got it. But also, it's very difficult to reverse engineer it, especially if you're talking about renaming. You're going to have to buy new domains. That has implications for SEO. So I'm always a bit like a stuck record when I go into startups. Say, if you have the money, just do this as soon as possible. Do it, with a reputable provider so that it will last 7 to 9 years, and it's done, because it is a big cost, but it's not like media budget that is kind of similar and increasing every year. It's kind of a sunk cost that you just have to get on with. So that's the one caveat. Do that as soon as you can, and you're not going to regret it. The other thing I would say around timing is don't go too soon. So if you haven't actually got your product ready to go to market, or your service isn't ready, or your software's in beta stage, you don't want to send out a massive mailing campaign to thousands of people if the product isn't actually ready to buy. Goodwill with your customer base is yours to lose. So if you go too fast and things aren't ready, you're going to have to repair a bad customer experience. That has PR implications. So slow and steady wins the race, and usually your budget will dictate that anyway from a startup point of view.
Right. No, of course. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. Again, down to your situation, it's very situational in some of these things, right? So you really want to, again, go back to that analysis and have that self-awareness of your shortcomings and what makes the most sense essentially for your venture at that time. Maybe to go back a little bit here. So we spoke about, the freelancers, the agencies, and the full-time hires, right? Something that's obviously, pretty prevalent in everyone's daily lives these days is the effect of marketing through influencers.
Yeah.
Right. And something that a lot of young people are kind of particularly interested in at this stage. So what have you had any experience with dealing with certain influencers in marketing strategies that you worked in the past, or do you have any opinions on leveraging influencers and when, or for specific sectors?
It really can move the dial for brands. I was working with a denim brand years ago. They were stocked on Net-a-Porter and Matches and all those types of platforms. But Gwyneth Paltrow wore their jeans, their flares, and she wrote about them on Goop. And if you looked at their data analytic, there was like this, and then there was a day that Gwyneth Paltrow wore the jeans, and the massive spike in sales and revenue. So and then you get celebrities wearing things. I think it's not a simple answer for me. I'm not black and white on the use of influencers. I think what I like is when it sort of feels a bit genuine, like it is just a celebrity walking down the street wearing clothing. I think when it's brands posting about a celebrity wearing their outfit, it starts to become a bit like it's trying too hard. I like the use of influencers to feel quite natural and organic. I think also the question of who's responsible for managing influencers is quite it's not one I've got a firm answer to. Sometimes you'll work with a PR agency or a freelance PR that has their own great black book of influencers. Other times it might fall into social media, it might fall into marketing. So I don't think as an industry we've got it nailed as to how to perfectly execute that and who would own it and what the best practices are around it. I think that's a constantly moving situation for marketers. And I think, my rule of thumb with it would be just kind of do no harm and make sure that you're finding those partnerships that really seem genuine and necessary for your business, and not go too far out of your lane. I was working with an ophthalmology brand last year, and they used a platform to pay footballers to take selfies wearing their glasses, and it was just really all the investors saw it and they were like, oh my god, this is really bad, who has signed this off, and the founder was like, oh, I did it because it only cost 200 quid to get him to do it. And I was like, that doesn't mean you should do it. So again, it's kind of just keep in mind that goodwill is yours to lose, and try and keep it close and relevant for your customers to when you're thinking about the experience they have consuming that media.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But then going back to, again, what you mentioned in terms of staying true to yourself, right? And identifying that brand identity. But then we also spoke about how you kind of need to stay dynamic and adapt it to certain people. So how do you make that balance of staying true and fostering that brand identity, but then also staying dynamic and adapting certain campaigns or strategies according to who you're targeting?
I don't think that needs to be a trade-off. And if we come
Hmm.
back to personas, and even the startups with the smallest budgets, personas are a really good exercise to do, and you just need to get inside the head of your customer base. One really good example of this, I know I'm straying a little bit out of my lane here, is customer services. So
Hmm.
for me personally, I'm a business owner, I'm a mum, I have like no time in my day. So if I'm trying to engage with a brand to buy something, or there's been a problem and they're making it difficult for me and time consuming for me, then I get kind of cross. So I like, the brands that will get my repeat businesses are the ones that have, WhatsApp customer service or an email that's really simple. I haven't got
Hmm.
time for sitting in chats that's automated and it's taking me 10 minutes to ask for a refund. All those sorts of things are infuriating. So for me, it's about the brands that understand how precious my time is to me, and they make the experience of being a customer as seamless as possible. So for me, that's an example of how a brand can think about the real life of me as a customer and make my experience as good as possible. And I think you can apply that to any persona if you kind of brainstorm it.
Yeah. Okay, makes sense. So yeah, well, I mean, we can open up now to the audience and the questions that we have coming through. Got a few good intros coming in, guys. So keep those questions coming. But we'll start with this one from Sunny. So he said that he's a founder of Qdo, right? A referral platform that's just finishing up the MVP and looking to get to market soon, right? So he was wondering if he needed to leverage a marketing professional when pitching his idea to possible adventures at that pre-seed stage. Again, it goes back to kind of the timing and the needs. But what are your thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, I think, my experience of working through that phase with businesses is that investors really like to see founders being pragmatic, and they really like to see founders using the advice, using their networks. So if you are lucky that you have people in your network who are, senior marketers, or they're willing to do some work for you on the understanding that they get the job when the money's in the bank.
Right.
I can't, unless they're not very good at their job, there's no way that's going to be a detrimental thing to do in front of your investors.
Right. Yeah, of course, as long as it fits in with the budget, which makes a lot of sense. And sorry, Sonny, for misaddressing your pronouns there. But yeah, no, brilliant answer, Amy, and thank you for that. Not too many other questions coming through at this point, guys. So we'll give it a few minutes and hopefully get a few more in there. Otherwise, as we said, you can always reach out to Amy afterwards through Apollo, and hopefully set up some time with her from there. But yeah, I mean, any last things that you might want to touch on in terms of things that you might have been working on recently that you might want to share with the Apollo community, or things that you can help our founders with specifically that we might not have touched on today?
Oh, that's a really open question.
It is. So.
What I would say is I've got a long history of working with startup founders, and one analogy I always like to use with startup founders is, starting your own business is kind of like having a baby, right? You're only going to do it once or twice or three times in your life, and the first time you do it, it feels like a huge thing, and you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know if a problem is a 10 out of 100 or 100 out of 100. And, go back to that analogy, like if you were to have a baby, you'd probably get a nanny or a nurse, and that person has been dealing with babies for 20 years. So they'll be able to tell you how much you should panic about your baby. And it's exactly the same with startups, right? You can put an ecosystem around you of people who have been working with startups for 15 years, for 20 years, for 30 years. And so every time that you panic, you can go to that person and say, should I be panicking? Or is this something I shouldn't be panicking about? And, from my experience, 9 times out of 10, when founders are panicking, it's not, a mad emergency. Don't get me wrong, I've had some real PR nightmares in my time. But I think, it's really stressful to be a founder. It can be lonely, but there are lots of us out there who are really adept at working with founders and supporting you through that journey when it's tough.
Right. Yeah. We have one from Dan Jacobs, who is the founder of Bible, a platform to help small business owners start, run, and scale their businesses. And he was talking about MaaS, marketing as a service, and why early stage startups would even look at hiring a full-time employee or recruitment at that point, instead of benefiting from the knowledge and agility of leveraging mass. So do you have any, first of all, any insights into mass itself, and then and how you might balance leveraging that at the right time and when?
Just to clarify, when you say marketing as a service, do you mean bringing in an agency to do your marketing?
I would assume so, yeah, in terms
Yeah,
of leveraging an agency. And I mean, I know you touched on this in terms of agency versus full-time hires, right?
yeah.
So what are your
I mean,
opinions there?
I see it a lot, and it's actually, I would say, it's a symptom of, and I went through this with my business a long time ago. When you do good work and you end up with relationships on the investor side, they sort of start throwing everything at you. So I was in this really lucky position about 9 years ago when I was getting to the point where I was going to have to turn down business because I was getting asked to do so much across the portfolios of the investors that I was working with. And so I created an agency, just to make sure I could like realize that opportunity. And now I don't do that anymore, but I work in-house and I work with investors, and I see them doing that. They go back to the trusted providers that have done good work for them before. So what works really well for very low budget startups are these kind of, it's almost a freelancer, but it's like a freelancer with maybe another freelancer. So you get, the benefit of the fact that you're a really important client to them proportionally, but you remove some of the risks of like, oh, my freelancer's sick, or my freelancer's gone to Kenya for 2 months. So I actually do see that a lot. But what I would say is there's a huge variety of what might fit into that definition. Like it could be one or two people, or it could be, a much more considered business with a larger team. And there definitely is a place for that in supplying startups.
Okay, brilliant. We have one from Felix, who I believe you're familiar with. Felix has been working as a fractional CTO for a bunch of companies at the moment. And as you said, you are familiar with him in the past. He's got a question about data and your marketing. So how data driven should your marketing be at this early stage? Like, should it say 100%, what did he say here? Test anything and amplify what works, or is it 100% hard to quantify, brand building, or something in between there?
Oh, I love you for this question, Felix. I love data. My background is maths and economics, so I'm like one of the most geeky marketers you'll come across. And I just, I don't necessarily have a process. I just like to play with the data for, as long as I, can, given the budgets and the times that I've got with a client. And one thing I see clients not do enough of is actually just look at their customer database. So really good example of this is I was working with a brand in the parenting space, and they had a subscription model of prepared food for weaning and for young children. And they were looking at their data in terms of like time series. They were looking at their data in terms of the keywords that were driving revenue, but they hadn't actually just popped their customer data into a pivot table. And when I did this, I was able to tell them that like 20% of their business was coming from Chelsea and Islington, right? It's really, really straightforward. And, it's not surprising because these are the places where people who can afford subscription baby food live. But the fact that, I was telling them that when their business was quite established was a bit of a shock to me. Lots of successful founders will talk to you about how you need to know all this information about your business. Some really, really good training I got at the start of my career was rather crazy CEO who talked about the danger of aggregates. And I think, the last few years, most of my career, actually, there's been all this talk about big data and using all sorts of technology on data. But there's also the other argument, which is, probably 10 or 20% of your revenue is coming from 4 or 5, prominent customers. And I've even seen that in the D2C space. I've seen like women who spend 30 grand a year with a particular brand, and so if you have a business where you've got 3 or 4 really, really important clients, you need to know that, because the minute they go, that's trouble for you. So I would say look at your customer data, look for patterns in your customer data, and make sure you know where your money's coming from. And that can usually inform quite a lot of strategy. Certainly geolocations is one of my favorites, because it's very easy to waste a lot of media spend targeting a nation, or when realistically you can go down to postcode level and you can do all sorts of clever things with that. Especially with the cost of living crisis, we're seeing more polarization than ever. So some sort of proxy targeting to wealth, to location, should be a part of your marketing strategy if you're targeting end consumers,
Mhm.
to some degree for business as well, but I won't go off on a massive tangent about that today.
Yeah, no, of course. I've got to give a few questions here about really early stages, right? Kind of about building up that mailing list and how to get people engaged. Like, a lot of people don't want another subscription to an email that'll come through their inbox again. So what are your opinions on how to go about creating that mailing list, or also just in whole, essentially, what effective kind of channels of marketing that you can use at the very early stage when you're just trying to build that traction?
I think, when you're at your very earliest stages, it's not even about that, right? It's about your immediate customers, and it's using assumptions around similarity. I know that me and my 5 girlfriends all wear pretty much the same makeup brands and use the same toiletries. So I think, even before you get to the point where you're buying mailing lists or buying audiences, which, is sketchy sometimes, think about using that network effect. Think about the free tools that are available to build delight, referrals. One thing that I've come across a lot in networking events and speaking to my peers over the years is that when people genuinely love a product or service and it has a positive impact on their life, they will tell people, right? You want to be the one who makes your friend's life easier because you found this great new app, or you found the best conditioner. So just remember how important that is, and that works really well at the beginning when you don't have a lot of budget to play with.
Mhm. Yep, no, that makes a lot of sense. One from Nawal Ali, who's started a dentistry-based platform. Right? He's wondering about your opinion on community engagement and how you would market that kind of aspect of your business. How would you go about kind of engaging with that community and building those pillars in terms of your marketing strategy and bringing that back into the community?
Yeah, so there's been so much talk about community marketing for a long time, but I'm seeing some really interesting things happening within that space that I think it's going to get even bigger. And the trends that I'm seeing are about, let me backtrack. Like 5-10 years ago, it was just about having the biggest communities possible, right? Having the most followers. But where it's going now is, everyone's tired, everyone's tapped out. Now it's going about smaller communities that are super relevant, and they carry a lot more value for advertisers, and they carry a lot more value for investors as well. The other thing that I've seen investors really like is communities that the brands own. So I've seen some interesting investments a few years ago around the health and wellness sector, where one company's valuation was massively boosted because they actually own their own community within their own ecosystem. Because if you own your community on Meta, or you own your community on TikTok, it's not really yours. So there was that question about that. So I think there's loads of things coming out, new technologies, new kind of best practices around community management. I know personally, like, I'm getting loads of business off Slack. I'm on lots of founder communities, and I think that's where it's going. So around dentistry, I don't know if you're trying to target end consumers or you're trying to contact other dentists, but I would definitely say that to target and retain a community, it's about really having quality. They don't necessarily need to see a post every day. We're all sick of AI written posts that just clog up our lives. What they want to see is like genuine content that's really aligned with their needs. And that's also true for SEO. Like, Google's algorithms for many years have really been able to detect the content that is actually useful for users, and that's the type of content that gets prioritized. So those two strategies, if you're doing it well, you can be hosting the content on your website and you can be feeding it into your communities, and those two channels are going to work together to grow your user base and grow your relevancy in search engines as well. So it's just about, again, getting into the mind of your target audience and thinking, what do they actually want and how can I do it well? And I would always rather see something done less often but well than all the time to a poor standard.
Right, the consistency. Yeah, of course. Of course. No, that's brilliant. So we have one more here. I think Damian Yates. He's building a social media calendar app with us at the moment. Um, and he's trying to figure out obviously how to go about his approach. One of the things he's mentioned is that he's starting to reach out to these possible partnerships with mental health charities, other organizations, and obviously the NHS and things like that. So how would you go about fostering those partnerships first of all, and presenting your idea from that standpoint, and how effective are building partnerships with players that obviously might have that bigger market reach at this point, and obviously kickstarting your attraction with these users.
So obviously that's really, really important. And
Mhm.
some businesses would put that in marketing, and some businesses would put that in growth business development. So that's important to acknowledge. When some people talk
Yeah.
about that, it's not marketing. I mean, I don't mind, I'm across it all the time, but what I would say is that it's amazing to do, especially if there's a real clear benefit for both parties to have that partnership. The best way of getting those partnerships is through networking, for your relationships that you already have. The other way to do that is to hire tactically. So that's again where I mean it might be a little bit more business development, because it's much more common to hire business development executives based on their black book. But it's again, it's probably quite similar. It's about not going after too many. It's better to reach out to 5 people about a partnership opportunity with a really bespoke, crafted outreach message about how to benefit their business than it is to send an automated message to 200 businesses that it's not relevant for those 200 businesses. The other thing to think about with partnerships, if it is a potential partnership with another company that has 100 or 1,000 potential clients to onboard from your platform, you've got to come back to that point about goodwill and not losing it. You need to make sure you've only got one chance to go with that. So you don't want to facilitate it in a way that it breaks the platform or it creates a bad user experience with the partner or their client base. So it's again, that one I would say is about slow and steady wins the race. You also have to think about it from a account management side. Like if you suddenly onboard 100 customers, have you got the capacity to manage that? If something goes wrong, if you start getting 100 customer service messages a day, is that going to end your job as a founder and make you a customer service agent, or have you got someone there to help you with that? So it's about doing it in a way that's not going to cause more harm than good, I would say.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes sense. I think we might have time for one more. Just again from Sunny, she's wondering. It might be a bit specific here, so don't worry about going into too many details. But she's wondering about kind of how to figure out your budget, right, to assign to the marketing, right, especially within the first 6 to 12 months. And how do you go about finding freelancers that might be open to helping you, and again, figuring out what you require in order to engage with these kind of people.
Well, there's a couple of different ways to answer that question. And I think it depends. I would say the caveat is it depends if you're a direct to consumer brand or if you're doing a lead gen campaign for sort of a longer sales cycle. But ultimately, when you're in a fast growth stage of your business, you need to probably budget that you're going to break even on growth. So you need to take into consideration the margin that you're making on the product, and probably look to reinvest that on the marketing. If you've got a subscription model or something like that, you would build in the assumed churn and the average lifetime value, and you'll be looking at a proportion of that as a target cost per acquisition. So if you know that you're selling software and it's £10 a month, and you're going to have someone on it for 3 years, you can look to spend over 100 quid probably on acquisition. But if you're selling, I don't know, if you're selling jeans and they're 300 quid and you're only making 200 quid a pair, and you're growing your business, you're probably looking to spend 200 quid to acquire that customer. So quite often your customer acquisition costs will seem maybe high or a bit counterproductive, but it's not just based on the first transaction. It's based on bringing that user into your database and repeatedly selling to them. I worked with Net-a-Porter in 2011, and back then they were spending 400 quid on acquiring new customers based on an average lifetime of 1,500. Now, if you think how long Net-a-Porter has been going, I'm sure that average lifetime value is like 10 times, 20 times that now. Yeah. So the amount these companies are spending to acquire customers and retain customers that sets the tone of the competitive landscape you're going to be going into. So one of the common things I see is business owners setting those acquisition costs way too low. And then the problem is you go onto those landscapes like Google search and Meta, and you can't compete. You can't get your ads served because you haven't made your model realistic enough. And then I think the other thing I would say, and I was at a panel a few weeks ago with a number of private equity decision makers, and they were saying the best thing you can actually do is hire a fractional chief financial officer, because they want to see this pragmatism. They want to see that you've taken advice, and if they're investing in your business, they want to understand. They want some confidence in the financials that you're bringing to the table. So if you can afford that, get a fractional chief financial officer to look through your plans, because especially if they've had other experience in the sector, they'd be able to tell you off the bat, oh, those hiring costs look really wrong, or your software costs are going to be much higher. So again, it's about relying on that ecosystem of experts that have supported startups from where you are, but further down the line, so that you can learn from their history.
Amazing. Well, yeah, no, Avi, I think that's all the questions we have at the moment. So I just want to thank you so much for spending the time and answering my questions and all of these other ones that came through in the chat. So really appreciate it, Amy. You're clearly an expert in your field, and I think the Apollo community we're really lucky to have you as an ongoing kind of mentor and resource that we can leverage. So yeah, everyone feel free to reach out to Amy, connect with her, and she'll be happy to answer your questions. But yeah, thanks again. And then final thing, guys. Yeah, no, of course. Final thing is that I will be sharing that link for the Revolut business account on Apollo right now. So Amy, thanks again. Thanks for everyone that attended. And yeah, have a great evening, everyone.